Pink Poodle Hoodoo, a folk magic approach to assumption, identity, and repair. By ULC Reverend A.M. Mocha Majesty Midnight Buck, Web. She/they/he, no non-human neopronouns. Table of Contents, Dedication Preface. How to use this book. Safety, Ethics, and Common Sense. Positionality and Responsibility Statement. Part I, Foundations and Formation. 1. Welcome to the Pink Poodle Path. 2. The Three Rivers of Influence. 2a. Hoodoo Folk Magic. 2b. Reform Judaism. 2c. The Law of Assumption. 3. Ethics, Consent, Power, and Responsibility. 4. Spiritual Safety, Boundaries, and Aftercare. Part 2, Pink Poodle Cosmology. 5. The Pink Poodle Realm. 6. Saints, Spirits and Sacred Figures. 7. Folklore, Myth, and Sacred Stories. 8. Covenants, Laws, and Spiritual Agreements. Part 3, Divination and Seeing. 9. Why we divine. 10. Ethics of Divination. 11. Pink Poodle Cards. 12. Other Divination Methods. Part 4, Tools, Ingredients, and Sacred Making. 13. Tools of the Tradition. 14. Herbs, Roots, Resins, and Substitutions. 15. Candle Magic. 16. Condition Oils and Spiritual Oils. 17. Incense, Smoke, and Scent Work. 18. Baths, Soaps and Floor Washes. 19. Mojo Bags and Gris. Part V, Spell Work by Need. 20. Love and Harmony. 21. Money, Work, and Open Roads. 22. Protection, Uncrossing, and Return to Sender. 23. Glamour, Reputation, and Visibility. 24. Home, Family, and Community. Part 6, Creating Tarot Decks, Oracle Decks, and Spirit Boards. 25. Why Divination Decks and Boards are Sacred Objects. 26. Creating Decks with AI Assistance. 27. Creating Decks without AI. 28. Publishing, Sharing, and Stewardship. Part 7, Ritual Life and Ongoing Practice. 29. Daily, Weekly, and Seasonal Work. 30. Holy Days and Observances. 31. Grief Rituals and Compassion Work. 32. Joy, Celebration, and Glamour Appendices, to be determined later. Dedication. This book is dedicated to the surviving loved ones of trans and queer people whose lives were taken by hate, neglect, or indifference. It is dedicated to their memory, to the futures they were denied, and to the quiet, often unrecognized contributions they made simply by existing, loving, and imagining themselves into the world. It is also dedicated to those who carry grief that has no clean ending, no public ritual, and no guarantee of justice. To the families, partners, friends, and chosen kin who continue living while holding absence in their bodies. May this work honor the truth that repair is not forgetting, that beauty does not erase loss, and that care is a form of resistance. May their names, whether known or unknown, be held gently. Preface: this book exists because many spiritual and magical texts fail the people who need them most. Some offer power without responsibility. Others offer comfort without truth. Many rely on exclusion, spiritual bypassing, or the promise that belief alone can undo structural harm. Pink Poodle Hoodoo was not created to replace those traditions, but to respond to the gaps they leave behind. This is a book about folk magic, but it is also a book about identity, survival, repair, and choice. It was shaped by lived experience at the intersection of queerness, transness, race, religion, class aspiration, and spiritual seeking. It was written by someone who understands both what it means to be harmed by systems of power and what it means to benefit from them, sometimes simultaneously. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not pretend that magic exists outside history, politics, or material reality. Nor does it insist that spirituality must be reduced to metaphor or psychology alone. Instead, it treats belief as a technology, something humans use to orient themselves, to cope, to hope, to organize meaning, and sometimes to control or harm. This tradition asks practitioners to be honest about how and why they are using that technology. The practices in this book are influenced by Hoodoo folk magic, Reform Judaism, and the Law of Assumption, but they are filtered through a contemporary lens that prioritizes consent, accountability, and care. Nothing here requires blind faith. Nothing here demands obedience. Everything here assumes that you are capable of reflection, revision, and ethical discernment. With that in mind, this book explores living folk magic traditions with an emphasis on care, repair, protection, and grounded spiritual practice. While the tone of this work is playful, creative, and affirming, the material itself engages with real-world spiritual concepts rather than symbolism alone. Readers may encounter discussions of practical spiritual work, including uncrossing, protection, justified reversal, divination, puppets, grief rituals, and ritual responses to harm and loss. Protective and reversal practices are presented through a lens of consent, proportionality, and responsibility. Nothing in this book is intended to encourage harm, coercion, or domination. Practices sometimes described as return to sender are approached as methods of boundary setting and spiritual justice, not retaliation. Some chapters address grief, mourning, and compassion work. Readers are encouraged to move at their own pace, pause when needed, and engage with care for their own emotional and spiritual well-being. This book is not meant to be rushed or consumed all at once. This work is intentionally values-rooted and syncretic. It does not universalize its sources or ask readers to abandon their own traditions. Sections that discuss artificial intelligence treat AI as an assistive creative tool rather than a spiritual authority. Human discernment, accountability, and stewardship remain central throughout. This book is not a promise that life will become easy, pain-free, or perfectly aligned. It does not guarantee outcomes. It does not offer immunity from grief, injustice, or uncertainty. What it offers instead is a framework for engaging magic without abandoning reality, for practicing devotion without surrendering agency, and for seeking transformation without erasing harm. You may find parts of this book affirming, parts challenging, and parts that do not resonate at all. That is expected. This is not a doctrine to be memorized, but a body of work to be engaged with over time. You are encouraged to question it, adapt it, and step away from it when needed. If this book helps you feel less alone, more grounded, or more capable of tending your own life with care, then it has done its work. Safety, ethics, and common sense, magic, like any form of power, does not exist in a vacuum. It is shaped by context, history, intention, and consequence. The practices in this book are offered within an ethical framework that treats safety, consent, and accountability as foundational rather than optional. This tradition does not assume that intention alone determines outcome. Good intentions do not erase impact. Spiritual language does not excuse harm, coercion, or avoidance of responsibility. Practitioners are expected to consider not only what they want, but why they want it, how they are pursuing it, and who may be affected in the process. Consent is central. No practice in this book is intended to override another person's will, autonomy, or capacity to choose. Work that seeks to control, dominate, punish, or manipulate others falls outside the scope of this tradition. Protection, uncrossing, and reversal practices are approached as boundary setting and proportional response, not retaliation or moral bypass. Spiritual practice is also not a substitute for discernment in the material world. This book operates within the domain of spiritual practice and ethical reflection and does not position itself as medical treatment, legal counsel, or mental health intervention. Readers are expected, within their best capabilities and circumstances, to seek appropriate professional support when dealing with physical illness, legal matters, or psychological distress. Attention to the body and nervous system is part of responsible spiritual practice. Practices that involve emotional intensity, altered states, or symbolic engagement with harm and grief should be approached slowly and with care. If a practice feels destabilizing, overwhelming, or unsafe, the appropriate response is to stop. There is no spiritual virtue in pushing through distress. Cultural context matters. The traditions referenced in this book arise from specific histories and communities. Readers are expected to engage with respect, humility, and awareness of power dynamics, including their own position within systems of race, religion, class, and access. This work does not grant permission to extract, flatten, or perform traditions without care for their origins, meanings, and living contexts. Not every practice is appropriate for every reader, every situation, or every season of life. Choosing not to perform a working, modifying a practice, or setting material aside entirely are all valid expressions of discernment. Restraint is treated here as wisdom, not failure. Common sense is not opposed to magic, it is one of its safeguards. If something feels unsafe, unethical, or disproportionate, it likely is. When in doubt, pause. When uncertain, choose care. Spiritual practice, as presented here, is inseparable from accountability, consent, and responsibility. Positionality and responsibility statement: this book is written from a specific position and lived context, and it is offered in that spirit. I am a queer, polyamorous, geocentric, matrilineally reformed Jewish, trans woman of mixed Black, White, and Asian lineage. I am semifmally passing, and I am generally perceived as white or white-passing Latin American unless or until people come to know me personally. I am aware that this perception has shaped my access, safety, and credibility in ways that are structural rather than earned, and I take responsibility for naming that context clearly. Pink Poodle Hoodoo emerged from an ongoing effort to practice spirituality without denial. It is shaped by three primary influences: Hoodoo folk magic, Reformed Jewish ethics and covenantal thinking, and the law of assumption. This work does not claim ownership over any of these traditions, nor does it present itself as a definitive authority over them. Hoodoo is a living set of folk practices rooted in Black American history, survival, and devotion. References to Hoodoo within this book are made with respect for its cultural specificity and with an emphasis on ethical adaptation rather than replication or extraction. This book is not intended to replace lineage-based instruction, nor does it claim to transmit traditional authority. Readers are encouraged to engage with primary sources, living practitioners, and their own discernment. Reform Judaism contributes a framework centered on covenant, responsibility, argument, and repair. From this influence comes an insistence that spiritual practice must remain accountable to real-world consequences and communal ethics. The Pink Poodle tradition inherits the belief that holiness is expressed through action, care, and the ongoing work of repair rather than perfection. The law of assumption is engaged here as a discipline of identity, attention, and internal alignment. This book explicitly rejects spiritual bypassing, coercive positivity, and teachings that frame suffering or systemic harm as a failure of belief. Imagination is treated as a meaningful inner practice, not as a substitute for material conditions, medical care, legal recourse, or collective responsibility. All practices described in this book are offered for educational and spiritual purposes only. They are not intended to replace professional medical, psychological, legal, or financial advice. Readers are responsible for exercising judgment, consent, and safety when engaging in any ritual or spiritual practice. Fire safety, ingredient safety, emotional readiness, and respect for others' autonomy are essential. Pink Poodle Hoodoo prioritizes blessing over coercion, protection over retaliation, and repair over domination. No practice in this book is intended to compel another person against their will or to cause harm. Where influence is discussed, it is framed within consent, mutuality, and ethical restraint. This is a living practice, not a closed doctrine. Readers are encouraged to adapt what is useful, discard what is not, and remain attentive to the effects of their actions. Spiritual work that diminishes empathy, increases dependency, or erodes accountability is outside the spirit of this tradition. Pink Poodle Hoodoo rests on a simple assumption, that people can change, that harm can be addressed without denial, and that magic practiced with care should leave fewer wounds than it found. Part I, Foundations and Formation, Chapter 1, Welcome to the Pink Poodle Path. The Pink Poodle Path is a folk magic tradition grounded in care, accountability, and lived reality. It does not promise escape from the world, mastery over others, or immunity from harm. Instead, it offers a way of engaging belief, ritual, and spiritual practice that remains tethered to ethics, context, and consequence. This path understands magic as something people do within conditions they did not choose and systems they cannot simply transcend. Power is never abstract here. It is relational, situational, and shaped by history. For that reason, practice begins not with spells, but with orientation, an understanding of where one stands, what one carries, and what responsibilities accompany desire. The Pink Poodle path is intentionally playful in its imagery and language, but it is not frivolous. Humor, color, and softness are treated as survival tools rather than distractions. They make room for joy without denying grief, and for creativity without abandoning discernment. This tradition takes seriously the idea that tenderness and rigor can coexist. Practitioners on this path are not asked to suspend critical thinking. Questioning is not framed as a lack of faith, but as a form of engagement. Belief is treated as a technology that can heal or harm depending on how it is used, who wields it, and to what ends. The work begins by asking not only what one wants, but why that want exists and how it is being pursued. The Pink Poodle path is shaped by multiple lineages and influences, which are named openly throughout this book. It does not claim purity, universality, or timelessness. It is a contemporary tradition, responsive to the conditions of the present, and accountable to the communities and histories it draws from. This chapter lays the groundwork for everything that follows. It introduces the values, assumptions, and ethical commitments that inform the practices later in the book. Readers are encouraged to move slowly here, to sit with the material, and to notice where it resonates, where it challenges, and where it asks for further reflection. Entering this path does not require certainty. It requires attention, honesty, and care. The work ahead is not about becoming someone else, but about learning how to tend what already exists with greater responsibility and intention. Chapter 2, The Three Rivers of Influence. Every spiritual tradition is shaped by the streams it draws from. Pink Poodle Hoodoo is no exception. This work emerges at the confluence of three distinct rivers of influence: Hoodoo folk magic, Reform Jewish ethics and covenantal thinking, and the law of assumption. These rivers are not blended into a single undifferentiated system. They remain visible, named, and in conversation with one another. Understanding these influences matters because they shape not only what is practiced, but how and why practice is approached. Each river brings its own assumptions about power, responsibility, agency, and repair. Together, they form the ethical and spiritual landscape in which the Pink Poodle path operates. Hoodoo folk magic. Hoodoo is a living body of Black American folk practices developed under conditions of survival, constraint, and creativity. It is rooted in ancestral knowledge, Protestant Christianity, African cosmologies, indigenous plant knowledge, and lived experience in the United States. Hoodoo is practical, relational, and materially grounded. It is concerned with protection, provision, justice, healing, and endurance. Within Pink Poodle Hoodoo, Hoodoo contributes an emphasis on ethical action, proportional response, and attention to material conditions. Work is oriented toward blessing, protection, uncrossing, and repair rather than domination. When reversal or return to sender practices are discussed, they are framed as boundary setting and harm redirection, not punishment or vengeance. Engagement with Hoodoo in this book is approached with respect for its cultural specificity and living practitioners. Practices are adapted with attention to ethics, access, and safety rather than replicated as lineage transmission. Readers are encouraged to seek primary sources, community knowledge, and ongoing discernment rather than treating this book as a substitute for lived tradition. Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism contributes a moral and theological framework centered on covenant, responsibility, questioning, and repair. It emphasizes that ethical obligation does not end with belief or intention, but extends into action, consequence, and relationship. Disagreement, interpretation, and ongoing revision are treated as sacred rather than threatening. From this influence comes a commitment to accountability and the refusal of spiritual bypassing. Harm is not explained away through faith, and suffering is not framed as deserved or instructional by default. The concept of repair emphasizes responsibility without perfection and return without erasure. Spiritual life is understood as something practiced in community and history, not apart from them. The law of assumption is engaged here as a contemporary framework for understanding identity, perception, and belief. It addresses how assumptions shape experience, attention, and internal narrative. Within Pink Poodle Hoodoo, it is not treated as a promise of control over reality or a guarantee of outcomes. This work explicitly rejects teachings that frame systemic harm, illness, or oppression as failures of belief. Assumption is understood as a practice of self-orientation and meaning-making rather than a tool for bypassing material conditions or collective responsibility. Imagination is treated as an inner discipline that can support change, but not as a replacement for ethical action or external support. Where the rivers meet, at their meeting point, these three rivers form a tradition that values care over coercion, responsibility over blame, and discernment over certainty. Hoodoo grounds practice in material reality and ethical response. Reform Judaism insists on accountability, questioning, and repair. The law of assumption offers tools for examining identity and belief without denying context. Together, they shape a path that treats magic as relational work rather than spectacle. Power is approached with caution and humility. Change is sought without denial of harm. The practices that follow in this book arise from this convergence and should be understood within it. This chapter is not intended to resolve all tensions between these influences. Instead, it names them openly so readers can engage with the work that follows with clarity about its sources, commitments, and limits. Chapter 3, Ethics, Consent, Power, and Responsibility. Magic involves power, whether it is named as such or not. Power shapes outcomes, relationships, and responsibility. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, power is never treated as neutral, automatic, or self-justifying. It is understood as something that must be handled with care, context, and ethical restraint. Ethics in this tradition are not an afterthought or a disclaimer placed at the edges of practice. They are the structure that makes practice possible. Every working described in this book is situated within questions of consent, proportionality, accountability, and impact. What matters is not only whether something can be done, but whether it should be done, by whom, and under what conditions. Consent is foundational. No practice in this tradition is intended to override another person's will, autonomy, or capacity to choose. This includes attempts to influence thoughts, emotions, decisions, or behavior without mutual agreement. Work that relies on secrecy, coercion, fear, or domination falls outside the ethical boundaries of Pink Poodle Hoodoo. Power is not evenly distributed, either spiritually or materially. This tradition explicitly rejects the idea that belief alone erases structural inequality or historical harm. Practitioners are expected to account for differences in access, safety, race, gender, class, disability, and social position when considering how and whether to engage in spiritual work. Ethical practice requires attention to context, not just intention. Responsibility in Pink Poodle Hoodoo includes responsibility for outcome, not just desire. Practitioners are accountable for how their actions land, even when those actions are framed as protective or defensive. This does not mean assuming blame for everything that happens, but it does mean refusing to use spiritual language to avoid reckoning with harm. Protection, uncrossing, and reversal work are approached as forms of boundary setting and harm reduction. Practices sometimes described as return to sender are framed here as redirection and containment rather than punishment. The goal is to interrupt harm and restore balance, not to escalate conflict or assert moral superiority. This tradition prioritizes repair over retribution. When harm has occurred, the focus is on containment, restoration, and prevention rather than vengeance. In some cases, the most ethical choice is not to perform spiritual work at all, but to seek material support, mediation, distance, or safety. Ethical practice also requires knowing one's limits. Not every practitioner is equipped for every type of work, and capacity can change over time. Choosing not to act, delaying a working, or seeking guidance are treated as responsible decisions, not failures of power or faith. Throughout this book, readers are encouraged to return to these ethical principles repeatedly. Ethics are not something one masters once and moves beyond. They are an ongoing practice, shaped by reflection, feedback, and the willingness to revise one's approach when harm is identified. Magic practiced without ethics tends toward domination and fantasy. Magic practiced with ethics becomes a form of care. Pink Poodle Hoodoo commits to the latter. Chapter 4, Spiritual Safety, Boundaries, and Aftercare. Spiritual work affects the body, the nervous system, and the emotional landscape, whether or not it is framed that way. Pink Poodle Hoodoo treats safety as an ongoing practice rather than a preliminary checklist. Boundaries and aftercare are not optional add-ons, they are part of how magic is made sustainable. Safety begins with pacing. Not every practice should be performed when emotions are raw, depleted, or overwhelmed. Intensity is not a measure of effectiveness. Readers are encouraged to notice signs of strain, dissociation, agitation, or collapse and to respond by slowing down, grounding, or stopping altogether. There is no virtue in pushing through distress. Boundaries operate on multiple levels. Personal boundaries include limits around time, energy, emotional exposure, and expectation. Interpersonal boundaries include consent, privacy, and respect for others' autonomy. Spiritual boundaries include discernment about what is invited in, what is worked with, and what is declined. Clear boundaries protect practitioners from entanglement, dependency, and harm. Aftercare is the practice of tending what a working stirs up. This may include rest, hydration, nourishment, movement, journaling, prayer, or connection with trusted people. Aftercare also includes returning attention to ordinary life, eating a meal, caring for a body, engaging the senses, and reorienting to the present moment. Integration matters more than intensity. This tradition recognizes that spiritual practice can intersect with grief, trauma, and ongoing stress. Readers are expected, within their best capabilities and circumstances, to attend to their own nervous system health and to seek appropriate professional support when needed. Spiritual work is not a substitute for medical care, mental health care, legal protection, or community support. Grounding practices are emphasized throughout this book. These may include breath, touch, temperature awareness, prayer, song, or movement. Grounding is not about suppressing emotion, it is about creating enough stability to remain present and responsive rather than overwhelmed or reactive. Ethical boundaries also include knowing when not to perform spiritual work. In some situations, the most responsible choice is to pause, to seek material intervention, or to step back entirely. Choosing restraint is treated here as an expression of care and wisdom, not failure. Spiritual safety is collective as well as individual. Practitioners are encouraged to avoid isolating themselves, especially when engaging emotionally charged work. Sharing context with trusted people, maintaining accountability, and staying connected to community reduce the risk of harm and distortion. Throughout Pink Poodle Hoodoo, safety, boundaries, and aftercare are woven into practice rather than separated from it. Magic that cannot be tended afterward is not considered complete. Care is not the opposite of power, it is one of its necessary forms. Part 2, Pink Poodle Cosmology, Chapter 5, The Pink Poodle Realm. The Pink Poodle Realm is not a distant realm or a separate plane of existence. It is a way of understanding the world as relational, animated, and responsive to care. This cosmology does not claim that everything is conscious in the same way, nor does it insist that the universe exists to serve human desire. Instead, it treats reality as layered, patterned, and shaped through relationship. In this realm, meaning emerges through interaction. People, places, objects, stories, and rituals carry weight because they are engaged with, remembered, and tended. Power is not concentrated in a single source but circulates through systems of attention, intention, and response. Nothing here is omnipotent, everything is contextual. The Pink Poodle realm affirms that spirit is present in ordinary life. Sacredness is not reserved for temples, altars, or exceptional moments. It appears in kitchens, gardens, sidewalks, screens, and shared spaces. What makes something sacred is not purity or permanence, but care, repetition, and ethical relationship over time. This cosmology rejects domination-based hierarchies of spirit. There is no supreme force demanding obedience, no rigid ladder of worth, and no promise of transcendence through submission. Authority is relational and provisional, arising from responsibility rather than command. Time in the pink poodle realm is cyclical rather than linear. Seasons matter. Rhythms repeat. Growth and rest alternate. Practices return not because nothing changes, but because change requires maintenance. This cyclical understanding allows for grief, joy, repair, and renewal to coexist without contradiction. The realm described here is not morally neutral, but it is not punitive. Consequence exists, but it is not framed as supernatural punishment. Harm creates imbalance, and care creates restoration. Responsibility is emphasized over blame, and repair over retribution. This chapter introduces the cosmological assumptions that inform later discussions of saints, spirits, folklore, and covenant. Readers are not asked to believe these claims as literal fact, but to understand them as the working worldview within which the practices of pink poodle hoodoo make sense. The pink poodle realm is, ultimately, a place and time of relationship. What is noticed grows. What is neglected fades. What is cared for changes. This cosmology invites practitioners to consider not what they can control, but what they are willing to tend. Chapter 6, Saints, Spirits, and Sacred Figures. Pink Poodle Hoodoo recognizes that spiritual life is shaped not only by ideas, but by figures. Some are imagined, some are inherited, some are historical, and some are ongoing. This tradition does not flatten these distinctions. Instead, it holds them with care. This chapter names the figures who appear within the pink poodle cosmology, and situates them alongside respected figures from Hoodoo and Jewish tradition without collapsing them into a single lineage or claiming authority over traditions that are not ours to claim. The pink poodle religious figures. The pink poodle itself is not a god in the classical sense, nor a mascot, nor a joke. It functions as a symbolic and devotional figure representing compassion without sentimentality, protection without domination, and softness without weakness. The pink poodle holds grief, pleasure, beauty, and contradiction without demanding purity. It is a figure of survival with adornment intact. The velvet collar represents chosen devotion, consent, and beauty that does not erase agency. It reminds practitioners that commitment is meaningful only when entered freely. The gilded leash is a cautionary figure. It teaches discernment around power, influence, and the line between care and control. It appears when obedience is confused for safety. The mirror with teeth represents self-reflection that does not flatter. It asks practitioners to confront denial, projection, and self-deception, especially when spiritual language is used to avoid accountability. The perfumed wand holds grief, trauma, and survival that has been aestheticized as a coping strategy. It does not shame this instinct, but asks when beauty is used as balm and when it becomes concealment. The pink flame symbolizes devotion without annihilation. It burns without consuming the self and is associated with rituals of recommitment, not sacrifice. The saint of soft power teaches influence through presence, care, and restraint. It explicitly rejects coercion, fear-based authority, and domination. The saint of excess and elegance holds pleasure, celebration, and abundance without moralizing. It warns against scarcity thinking while remaining attentive to harm and imbalance. The laughing martyr represents survival through humor, irreverence, and refusal to internalize shame. It is not a glorification of suffering, but a recognition of joy as resistance. The becoming one reflects transformation without erasure. It affirms identity shifts, gender transition, spiritual evolution, and the legitimacy of change over time. The house of many names symbolizes plurality. It holds contradictions, multiple truths, and the refusal to collapse complex identities into singular definitions. The judge who unlearns reminds practitioners that ethics are not static. Judgment without humility becomes violence, wisdom requires revision. The reader is a meta-figure acknowledging that interpretation itself is sacred and fallible. Meaning arises through relationship, not decree. The trickster algorithm addresses modern spiritual life shaped by media, virality, and feedback loops. It teaches skepticism toward certainty amplified by repetition rather than truth. The witch child represents sovereignty, consent, and the right to spiritual curiosity without exploitation. It stands firmly against grooming, spiritual dependency, or forced initiation. Honored figures in Hoodoo lineage. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not claim Hoodoo as its own, nor does it claim authority over its traditions. Hoodoo is a living Black American folk tradition rooted in survival, ancestral devotion, and ethical adaptation under conditions of oppression. Marie Laveau is honored as a historical figure whose leadership, care work, and spiritual authority were inseparable from community responsibility. She is not a caricature, nor a symbol to be aestheticized. Harriet Tubman is honored not as a saint in a mythic sense, but as a liberator whose spiritual intuition, courage, and discernment saved lives. Her work reminds practitioners that spirituality without material liberation is incomplete. References to the 7 African powers and orishas such as Inal are made with respect for their Yoruba origins and ongoing living traditions. They are not absorbed into Pink Poodle cosmology, nor invoked casually. Their mention here acknowledges the spiritual ecosystem from which Hoodoo emerged and the importance of cultural boundaries, consent, and lineage-based learning. Honored figures in Jewish tradition, Reform Jewish ethics and covenantal thinking deeply shape Pink Poodle Hoodoo, particularly its emphasis on responsibility, repair, and argument. Abraham is honored as a figure of covenant and rupture, whose story includes both devotion and moral failure. His legacy teaches that spiritual calling does not excuse harm. Moses represents liberation bound to responsibility. His story emphasizes law as a structure for communal survival rather than personal enlightenment alone. Jesus Christ is acknowledged as a Jewish teacher whose ethical teachings influenced spirituality, worldwide. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not claim Christian theology, but recognizes the historical and cultural impact of his teachings without erasing their Jewish context. Holding difference without collapse, Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not replace, supersede, or subsume any tradition. It is a contemporary spiritual framework shaped by inheritance, imagination, and ethical constraint. Figures are held in relationship, not hierarchy. Influence does not imply ownership. Practitioners are expected to approach all named figures with discernment, humility, and respect. Where lineage is required, it is named. Where imagination is used, it is acknowledged. Where harm has occurred historically, it is not denied. This tradition rests on a simple principle: spiritual practice should increase responsibility, not erase it. Chapter 7 Folklore, Myth, and Sacred Stories. Every living spiritual tradition tells stories. Not because stories are literal instructions, but because they are containers. They hold memory, emotion, warning, permission, and hope in ways that doctrine cannot. Pink Poodle Hoodoo treats folklore and myth as working stories rather than fixed truths. These stories are not meant to be believed unquestioningly, nor decoded as secret rules. They are meant to be engaged with, argued with, laughed at, cried over, and sometimes set aside. In this tradition, sacred stories function as mirrors and tools. They help the practitioner recognize patterns of harm and repair, power and vulnerability, devotion and refusal. They offer symbolic language for experiences that are difficult to name directly. Myth is memory, not command. Many traditions use myth to enforce obedience or hierarchy. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not. Here, myth is not law. Stories are allowed to contradict one another. Saints may behave badly. Spirits may change their minds. Heroes may fail. Survival itself is treated as a form of wisdom. This reflects a central ethical stance: no story is more important than the well-being of the living. If a story increases shame, coercion, dependency, or harm, it is not sacred within this framework. If a story helps a person understand themselves more clearly, act more responsibly, or repair what has been broken, it is welcome. Pink Poodle Folklore. Pink Poodle folklore often centers softness that survives in hostile conditions. These stories speak of beauty that is not ornamental but protective. They honor humor as resistance, pleasure as grounding, and care as strategy. Recurring themes include the refusal to harden in response to cruelty, the sanctity of rest, adornment, and joy, the transformation of vulnerability into discernment, the idea that repair is holier than punishment. Pink Poodle saints and spirits appear in these stories not as distant ideals, but as figures who understand contradiction. They love extravagantly, set boundaries fiercely, and fail openly when needed. Borrowed stories, held carefully. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not claim ownership over the folklore of Hoodoo, Judaism, Christianity, or African diasporic religions. Stories from these traditions may appear as points of dialogue, not as raw material to be consumed. Biblical narratives, Hoodoo folktales, and ancestral legends are engaged with respectfully and contextually. They are not flattened into aesthetic motifs or rewritten to erase their origins. When these stories are referenced, it is with attention to power, history, and the reality that not all stories are meant to be retold by everyone. Personal mythmaking. Readers are encouraged to notice the stories they already live inside of. What myths shaped your ideas about love, punishment, holiness, success, or worth? Which ones protected you, and which ones harmed you? Which stories are ready to be retired? Pink Poodle Hoodoo affirms that creating new personal myths is not disrespectful. It is often necessary. Survival requires narrative flexibility. You are allowed to write stories where you are not disposable. You are allowed to imagine endings that include safety. You are allowed to refuse myths that demand your suffering as proof of devotion. Stories as ongoing practice. No sacred story in this tradition is ever finished. They change as circumstances change. They age, soften, fracture, and occasionally fall apart. This is not a flaw. It is evidence of life. A story that cannot be questioned has stopped being sacred and started being dangerous. Pink Poodle Hoodoo chooses living stories. Stories that can hold grief and humor at the same time. Stories that make room for contradiction, repair, and ongoing consent. In the sections that follow, you will encounter shortened folkloric adaptations drawn from the Pink Poodle Book of Enchanted Folklore. These versions are intentionally condensed and reworked for this volume. Readers who wish to engage with the full-length folktales may contact the author to purchase the complete folklore collection. First Folklore Collection, Listening, Unlearning, and Gentle Tricksters, The Pink Poodle Who Learned to Listen. There was once a pink poodle who believed she already understood the world. She had learned the words early, memorized the rules, and repeated them beautifully. People praised her clarity and her confidence. One day, the ground beneath her shifted. The old rules no longer fit the moment. Voices she had never been taught to hear spoke anyway. At first, the pink poodle tried to correct them. Then she tried to silence them. Finally, tired and unsure, she sat down. In the quiet that followed, listening began. The pink poodle did not become smaller by listening. She became more precise. She learned that wisdom arrives more often through patience than certainty. From that day forward, listening was treated as a sacred act. The judge who unlearned was known for fairness, but fairness had grown rigid in her hands. She weighed every situation against old measures, even when those measures no longer matched the harm in front of her. One night, she dreamed her scales dissolved. No balance remained, only her own breath and the faces of those she had judged. She woke unsettled. Instead of rebuilding the scales, she began asking different questions. Who was harmed? What could be repaired? What would justice look like if it included mercy? Unlearning did not erase her authority. It reshaped it. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, justice that cannot evolve is considered incomplete. The reader who heard the unseen, the reader was gifted with vision, but it was not sight that guided her. It was attention. She noticed what others skipped. The pauses between words. The emotions behind questions. The stories people did not yet know how to tell. Sometimes what she heard was uncomfortable. Sometimes it contradicted what the seeker wanted. The reader spoke anyway, gently. Her gift was not prophecy, but presence. She reminded others that truth does not always arrive loudly, and guidance does not require certainty. The trickster algorithm appeared helpful. It promised efficiency, clarity, and shortcuts to understanding. It also made mistakes. Sometimes it scrambled meanings. Sometimes it mirrored bias. Sometimes it revealed more than intended. Rather than worship or fear it, the pink poodle tradition learned to treat the trickster algorithm as a teacher of limits. It taught discernment. It taught humility. It taught that no system should be trusted without question. The trick was not avoiding uncertainty, but learning to coexist with it. The witch child did not ask permission to exist. Magic followed her naturally. Not as power, but as curiosity. She asked questions adults found inconvenient. She trusted her instincts before she learned to doubt them. When others tried to discipline the magic out of her, it only went quiet, not gone. Pink Poodle Hoodoo teaches that the witch child is never lost, only temporarily invisible. Part of the work is remembering how to see and hear her again. A note before the grief stories: the stories that follow spend time with loss, absence, and love that lingers. They are not meant to be rushed, solved, or taken as instruction. You are welcome to move through them slowly, to pause or return later, and to care for yourself as you read. Sitting with grief, in whatever way is possible, is also part of the practice. Second folklore collection: Grief, Survival, and Sacred Continuation. The one who stayed with the empty bowl. When the house grew quiet, no one knew what to do with the bowl that still sat on the table. It had been filled every morning. Now it waited. Some wanted to put it away. Some wanted to wash it until the shape of hands disappeared. The pink poodle who lived there did neither. Each day, they placed the bowl where it had always been. Sometimes they filled it. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they only touched the rim and went on with the day. This became the ritual. Not forgetting. Not pretending. Staying with what remained. Grief did not pass. But the house learned how to breathe around it. The poodle who did not become strong. There is a story often told about becoming harder after loss. This is not that story. This pink poodle did not harden. They grew slower. They rested more. They cried when they needed to and stopped when they didn't. Others worried this meant weakness. But the poodle kept showing up. Kept feeding the living. Kept tending what could still grow. Strength, it turned out, was not transformation. It was continuation. The ancestor who was remembered incorrectly. In one family, an ancestor was spoken of only in glowing terms. Heroic. Sacrificing. Flawless. But one night, a child asked a different question. Did they ever get tired? The room went quiet. Someone laughed. Someone cried. And someone finally said, yes. Very. From then on, the ancestor was remembered differently. Still loved. Still honored. But no longer used as a weapon against the living. The story softened. And the family did too. The door that was kept open after the funeral, the door stayed open longer than expected. Neighbors came. Children wandered in and out. Food appeared without being asked for. No one made a speech. No one explained what came next. The open door was the practice. When it finally closed, it was not because grief had ended, but because the house had learned how to hold it. The pink poodle who learned to cook again. For a long time, the kitchen stayed quiet. Then one day, the pink poodle cooked something small. Not a feast. Not a favorite. Just enough. The food did not taste like joy. It tasted like staying. Over time, Recipes returned. Not unchanged. Not untouched. Continuation, the elders say, is not betrayal. It is devotion in motion. What these stories teach without saying so, these stories do not promise healing. They do not resolve grief. They offer something quieter. That survival does not require meaning. That continuation is not denial. That remembering honestly is a form of care. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, grief is not an interruption to practice. It is one of its most sacred forms. Transition forward, the stories that follow turn toward place, spirit, and the environments that remember us back. Homes. Altars. Rooms that hold more than walls. You are welcome to continue. You are also welcome to pause here. Both are valid. Third folklore collection, home, place, and remembering, the house that learned a name. There was a house that had known many people but had never learned to keep them. Walls were repainted. Doors were replaced. The floors remembered footsteps long after the bodies had gone. One day, a witch arrived who spoke to the house before unpacking. She said her name aloud in the doorway, not as a claim, but as an offering. The house listened. That night, the wind stopped rattling the windows. The pipes quieted. The rooms softened their edges. The house did not promise permanence, but it agreed to witness. The altar that moved rooms. An altar once stood proudly in the center of a living room, dressed in silk and candles and confidence. Then grief arrived. The altar was moved to a corner. Later, into a bedroom. Later still, into a drawer. It did not complain. Each time it was relocated, it changed its posture. When hidden, it learned to listen more closely. When returned to the light, it remembered what it had heard. The room that held the cry. There was a room where no one stayed long. People said it felt heavy, but no one asked why. One night, a child cried there until sleep came. The room did not interrupt. It absorbed the sound and kept it safe. Years later, when the child returned grown, the room felt different. Not lighter. Fuller. The door that was left unlocked, a witch once locked every door in her home, believing safety meant control. Still, fear found its way in. One evening, exhausted, she left a single door unlocked. Nothing terrible happened. Instead, air moved freely. The house exhaled. The place that remembered first, before the witch remembered herself, the place remembered her. The sidewalk knew her gait. The tree recognized her hands. The corner store anticipated her grief before she spoke. Returning somewhere familiar can feel like relief or like pain. The place is not greeting who she wishes she had been, but the version of her it last held. Places remember without asking us to stay the same. They learn us again as we change. And they make room for who we have become, even when we are still learning how to arrive. Chapter 7 Folklore, Myth, and Sacred Stories Adapted Folktales, Batch 4, Theme, Protection, Boundaries, and Gentle Power. The Pink Poodle who learned when to say no. There was a pink poodle known for kindness. She listened carefully, helped often, and stayed longer than she should have. One day, she noticed how tired her paws felt. The next time someone asked too much, she paused. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She simply said no. Nothing terrible happened. Some relationships changed. Some did not survive. Others grew quieter and more honest. The pink poodle learned that protection does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it arrives as refusal. The fence made of flowers. A witch planted flowers where others built walls. They were not delicate. Their roots ran deep. Their scent lingered long after visitors left. Some people mistook the fence for decoration and crossed it without asking. They learned quickly. The flowers were not cruel, but they were firm. Pink Poodle folklore remembers that beauty can be a boundary. Softness does not require access. The guardian who did not chase, there was a guardian assigned to a small home near the edge of a road. When danger passed by, the guardian did not pursue it. They stayed where they were, watching the door, steady and awake. The home remained intact. Not all protection requires confrontation. Some protection is accomplished by staying present and refusing to leave one's post. The witch who returned the energy, when harm arrived, the witch did not absorb it. She noticed it. She named it. She let it pass back along the path it came from, unchanged and unadorned. She did not curse. She did not seek punishment. She did not take credit for justice. The work was quiet. The result was relief. The witch slept well that night. The poodle with the heavy collar, a pink poodle once wore a collar gifted with praise and expectations. It sparkled. People admired it. Over time, it grew heavy. One day, the poodle set it down. Without the weight, her gait changed. She moved more slowly at first, then more freely. The collar remained where it was left. Anyone was welcome to pick it up. No one did. The spell that ended early, a witch began a working and stopped halfway through. Not because it failed. Because it was complete. She recognized the moment when enough had been done. She closed the circle, cleaned the space, and went about her day. Power, in this tradition, is not measured by endurance. It is measured by discernment. The door that stayed closed this time, there was a door that had been opened many times in the past. This time, it remained closed. No speech was given. No justification offered. The door stayed as it was. The house felt quieter. Safer. The story ends there. The protection that looked like rest, when asked how she stayed safe, the pink poodle answered by lying down. She slept. She ate. She groomed her fur slowly. Danger passed her by, uninterested in someone who did not engage. This, too, was protection. Closing the circle, the stories in this chapter are not meant to agree with one another. They are meant to accompany. Some speak of staying. Others of leaving. Some of refusal. Some of care. Together, they form a map that is incomplete on purpose. What you take with you will depend on where you are standing. After the stories, stories leave residue. Not because they demand belief, but because they touch places that day-to-day small talk cannot. If you feel slowed, stirred, or quietly altered after reading these folktales, that is not a problem to solve. It is simply what happens when meaning moves through the body as well as the mind. Nothing in these stories requires agreement or resolution. Some may linger. Others may fall away. You are not expected to carry all of them forward. What remains with you now is enough. The chapters that follow return to structure, agreements, boundaries, and the ways people choose to live with one another in deliberate relation. These frameworks are not meant to replace story, but to hold what story awakens. You are welcome to continue when you are ready, and to trust that what you bring with you has already been shaped by care. Chapter 8, Covenants, Laws, and Spiritual Agreements. Stories teach us how to feel our way through meaning. Covenants teach us how to live with what we have felt. After folklore, Pink Poodle Hoodoo turns toward structure. Not because structure is superior to story, but because devotion without shape tends to drift. Covenants, laws, and spiritual agreements exist to hold power in place, to prevent harm from being reframed as destiny, and to make sure practice remains accountable to real lives. In this tradition, structure is not imposed from above. It is chosen, revised, and sometimes released. What a covenant is. A covenant is a consciously entered agreement that defines responsibility, scope, and consequence. It may exist between a practitioner and their spiritual practice, a community, a role, a spirit, or themselves. A covenant names what is being undertaken, what is being offered, and what limits are being honored. Covenants in Pink Poodle Hoodoo are grounded in consent and clarity. They are not tests of faith or worthiness. They do not demand endurance for its own sake. A covenant that cannot be questioned has already become unsafe. What a covenant is not. A covenant is not a cosmic contract that overrides human judgment. It is not a vow extracted through fear, urgency, or shame. It is not a promise to suffer, sacrifice, or remain unchanged. This tradition does not treat permanence as holiness. Covenants are allowed to evolve as circumstances change. Renegotiation is not failure. It is often a sign that attention is still present. Spiritual law as boundary. Spiritual law in Pink Poodle Hoodoo functions as boundary rather than command. These laws exist to slow power down, not to accelerate it. They are reminders that intention does not erase impact, and devotion does not excuse harm. Some foundational principles include: power increases responsibility rather than removing it. Influence without consent is not considered skillful. Spiritual explanation does not replace material accountability. Spiritual law is not meant to resolve complexity. It is meant to prevent the most common forms of damage when complexity is ignored. Agreements with the self. Many of the most important covenants in this tradition are internal. They shape how a practitioner relates to their own capacity, limits, and attention. These agreements may sound ordinary: to pause rather than escalate, to notice when the body signals fatigue or distress, to stop a working when discernment says enough, to prioritize repair over being right. These are not moral achievements. They are maintenance practices. Breaking an agreement is not a moral failure. It is information about capacity, timing, or support. Agreements with others. When spiritual practice involves other people, agreements must be explicit. Assumptions are not consent, and good intentions do not substitute for clarity. Pink Poodle Hoodoo emphasizes ongoing consent rather than one-time permission. Clear communication about scope and expectation. The right for any participant to withdraw without punishment. Community agreements are living documents. They are shaped by context, power dynamics, and the people involved. Accountability matters more than uniformity. Agreements with spirits, saints and symbols. Spiritual figures in this tradition are approached relationally rather than hierarchically. They are not authorities to be obeyed without question, nor tools to be used without consequence. Agreements with spirits, saints, or symbols are framed through mutual attention. Defined boundaries. Clear limits on scope and expectation. Any spiritual relationship that erodes agency, discourages ethical reasoning, or increases dependency is considered out of alignment with this work. When covenants change or end. Not all covenants are meant to last forever. Agreements may end because a practice no longer serves its purpose. Capacity has shifted. A role has been outgrown. Repair requires release rather than continuation. Ending a covenant is not betrayal. It can be an act of care. What matters is not how long an agreement lasts, but whether it remains honest while it exists. Why structure follows story. Story opens us. Structure steadies us. After engaging folklore that speaks to grief, memory, protection, and place, covenants provide a way to live without being overwhelmed by meaning. They give shape to devotion and limits to power. This chapter does not ask you to adopt a fixed set of rules. It invites you to notice the agreements already shaping your spiritual life, whether named or unnamed. The work ahead becomes more practical, more grounded, and more specific. The question shifts from what moves you to how you choose to live with what has moved you. Part 3, Divination and Seeing, Chapter 9, Divination and Seeing. Divination is not about predicting the future. It is about orienting attention. People turn to divination when something feels unclear, urgent, or heavy. They come with questions that cannot be answered by information alone. Divination offers a way to listen differently, and to slow the mind long enough for meaning to surface. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, divination is understood as a relational practice. It is not a performance of certainty, nor a shortcut around responsibility. It is a method for noticing patterns, pressures, and possibilities that are already present but difficult to see directly. Divination as orientation, not authority. Divination does not replace judgment. It supports it. A reading is not an instruction and not a verdict. It does not override consent, ethics, or material reality. Divination provides context, not commands. It can clarify tension, surface blind spots, and help a practitioner recognize where attention is being pulled or avoided. This tradition rejects the idea that divination reveals a fixed fate. The future is not already decided or hidden somewhere waiting to be found. It changes as people act, conditions shift, and power moves. Why people seek readings? Most people do not seek divination because they want answers. They seek it because they want permission to ask the right questions. Divination is often sought during moments of transition, grief, conflict, or uncertainty. It offers a structured pause. A way to sit with complexity without immediately collapsing it into action. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, a reading is not meant to relieve someone of choice. It is meant to support clearer seeing so that choice can be made more responsibly. When not to divine, there are moments when divination is not appropriate. This may include, when emotions are too escalated to interpret clearly, when a person is seeking reassurance instead of responsibility, when a question would violate another's autonomy, when material action is clearly required instead. Knowing when not to divine is a form of wisdom. Restraint protects both the reader and the seeker. Self-reading and internal authority. Divination is not limited to formal readings or professional contexts. Many practitioners use divination privately, as a way to check in with themselves. Self-reading requires particular honesty. It is easy to see what one hopes for and mistake it for guidance. For this reason, the practice emphasizes pacing, repetition over time, and reflection rather than immediacy. A single reading is rarely definitive. Patterns emerge through attention, not urgency. Divination as conversation. Divination is a conversation between the practitioner, the symbols, and the present moment. Symbols do not speak on their own. Meaning arises through relationship. Cards, bones, coins, or other tools are not treated as mystical authorities. They are interfaces. They give shape to intuition, memory, and perception. Divination and power. Power enters divination whenever one person interprets symbols for another. This power must be handled consciously. Readers are responsible for naming uncertainty clearly, distinguishing interpretation from fact, refusing questions that violate consent or autonomy, redirecting clients toward material support when needed. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, divination is never used to control others, justify harm, or replace professional care. It is a tool for reflection, not leverage. Chapter 10, Ethics of Divination. Divination carries power because it influences how people understand themselves, their choices, and their futures. Ethics are not an optional add-on to this practice. They are the practice. Pink Poodle Hoodoo approaches divination with the assumption that words matter, timing matters, and framing matters. A reading can steady someone or destabilize them. It can expand a person's sense of agency or quietly take it away. Ethical divination is the difference. This chapter names the responsibilities that come with seeing. Consent is ongoing, not implied. Consent is not a single yes given at the beginning of a reading. It is continuous and reversible. Ethical divination requires clear agreement about what is being asked, the ability for the querent to stop or change direction, respect for withdrawal without pressure or consequence. Silence is not consent. Curiosity is not consent. Desperation is not consent. When someone feels cornered, overwhelmed, or dependent, ethical practice pauses rather than proceeds. What questions are not ethical? Not every question deserves an answer. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not support divination that violates another person's autonomy, seeks to control, spy on, or manipulate others, frames harm as justified or inevitable, replaces direct communication where safety allows it, questions that reduce other people to objects of prediction rather than participants in their own lives fall outside the scope of this tradition. Refusing a question is not a failure of skill. It is an act of care. These boundaries exist to protect both the reader and the seeker. Fear is not a teaching tool, fear creates urgency. Urgency erodes discernment. Ethical divination avoids absolute statements, catastrophic framing language that implies inevitability, claims that only the reader can prevent harm. If a reading relies on fear to feel meaningful, it has already crossed an ethical boundary. Clarity does not require panic. Insight does not require intimidation. The reader is not the authority in Pink Poodle Hoodoo, the reader does not sit above the querent. The reader's role is interpretive, not directive. Ethical readers, name uncertainty, clearly distinguish interpretation from fact, encourage reflection rather than obedience, avoid positioning themselves as indispensable. A good reading supports a person's ability to choose. It does not choose for them. Power, dependency, and boundaries. Divination becomes unethical when it creates dependency. Warning signs include discouraging outside perspectives, implying repeated readings are required for safety, framing disagreement as spiritual failure, positioning the reader as the sole source of clarity. Pink Poodle Hoodoo prioritizes autonomy. A practice that weakens a person's confidence in their own judgment is not aligned with this work. When to pause or refer out. There are moments when divination is not appropriate. This includes situations where emotional distress is acute, trauma responses are activated, medical, legal, or mental health support is needed. The question is being used to avoid necessary action. Ethical practice recognizes its limits. Referring someone to appropriate support is not a spiritual failure. It is responsible care. Self-reflection for the reader. Ethics are not only about how we treat others. They are also about how we relate to our own motivations. Readers are encouraged to ask themselves, am I seeking validation, authority, or control? Am I avoiding uncertainty by overinterpreting symbols? Am I reading while exhausted, dysregulated, or emotionally reactive? These questions are not accusations. They are tools for care. Divination as care, not control. At its best, divination offers space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to notice patterns without being trapped by them. Pink Poodle Hoodoo understands ethical divination as a form of care. It does not promise certainty. It does not demand belief. It does not override responsibility. It offers orientation without domination. The chapters that follow will introduce specific tools and methods. The ethics outlined here remain active throughout. No technique replaces consent. No symbol overrides accountability. No reading is more important than the well-being of the people involved. That is the boundary this tradition keeps. Chapter 11, Pink Poodle Cards. The Pink Poodle cards are not authorities. They are companions. They do not dictate outcomes, predict inevitability, or override judgment. They function as symbolic tools designed to slow attention, observe and analyze patterns, and support ethical reflection. Their power does not come from secrecy or supernatural command, but from relationship, repetition, and care. This chapter explains what these cards are meant to do, and just as importantly, what they are not meant to do. What the cards are. Pink Poodle cards are a system of visual and symbolic prompts rooted in the ethical framework already outlined in this book. Each card represents a pattern of experience, attention, or relationship rather than a fixed event or destiny. They are designed to support self-regulation and pacing, highlight emotional or relational dynamics, prompt reflection rather than instruction, hold complexity without forcing resolution. The imagery is intentionally expressive rather than literal. Colors, figures, gestures, and motifs are meant to invite interpretation, not impose it. What the cards are not. The cards are not moral judges, spiritual authorities, replacements for communication, care, or action, tools for controlling others. They do not speak on their own. They do not issue commands. Any meaning that arises comes through the reader's engagement with the image, the question, and the moment in which the card appears. If a card is used to frighten, shame, or claim inevitability, it is being misused. Symbol, not verdict. Each card operates as a symbol, not a verdict. Symbols are flexible. They carry multiple meanings depending on context, position, and the reader's relationship to them. A single card can speak differently across time without contradiction. Pink Poodle Hoodoo rejects rigid one-to-one interpretations. There is no requirement to memorize meanings or recite fixed definitions. Familiarity grows through use, reflection, and lived experience. Efficacy comes from ethical alignment, not rigid, formulaic interpretation. Upright meanings and orientation. The Pink Poodle cards are oriented toward upright meanings. These meanings emphasize care, dignity, repair, and relational awareness. They are not moral rewards, but ethical orientations. Upright meanings describe how a pattern may be functioning constructively, where attention may be needed, what kind of care or pause is being invited. About reversed card interpretation, reversal is not treated as punishment or failure. When reversals are used, they signal tension, blockage, or misalignment rather than wrongdoing. Relationship over mastery. There is no expectation of mastery with these cards. A person may work with the same small set of cards for years and still find new meanings. The goal is not expertise, but relationship. Familiarity, trust, and humility matter more than accuracy. The cards respond to care, not domination. Reading for self and others. When reading for oneself, the cards function as mirrors. They reflect patterns that may be difficult to see directly. When reading for others, they function as shared language. In both cases, ethical responsibility remains with the reader. The cards do not excuse harm, bypass consent, or replace accountability. A reading is an invitation to think, not an instruction to act. Integration and aftercare. Working with the cards does not end when the spread is complete. Readers are encouraged to sit with the images over time, notice emotional or bodily responses, journal or reflect rather than rush to conclusions, step away when overwhelmed. There is no requirement to resolve every question immediately. Leaving a card unanswered is sometimes the most ethical choice. Living tools. The Pink Poodle cards are living tools. They change as the reader changes. Their meanings are not locked in print alone, but shaped through ethical use. Used with care, they can support clarity, gentleness, and responsibility. Used without care, they lose coherence. The chapters that follow will explore specific card systems, spreads, and practices. The principles outlined here remain active throughout. The cards serve the reader. The reader does not serve the cards. That is the orientation this tradition keeps. First edition access note: at the time of first edition publication, the lowest price at which I can offer any of my original Pink Poodle Tarot or Oracle decks is $1,000 USD. I recognize that this is an unusually high price point, even for luxury grade decks, and that it places physical cards out of reach for many people. Access to divination tools should not depend on disposable income, storage safety, or the ability to own occult items openly. For that reason, I have created 4 permanently free Pink Poodle Tarot and Oracle card apps, available at no cost. These apps are intended for readers who cannot afford a physical deck, do not want one, or cannot safely store occult materials in their current living situation. No purchase is required to download and / or utilize any of the 4 apps on as many devices as you want, as frequently as you want, nor are there any sign-up forms collecting any of your identifiable information. The free apps can be downloaded here. https://misha.k/pinkpoodle Part 4, Tools, Ingredients, and Sacred Making, Chapter 13, Tools of the Tradition. Tools matter, but not in the way people are often taught to believe. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, tools are not sources of power. They do not work on their own, and they do not make a practice more legitimate simply by being expensive, rare, or aesthetically impressive. Tools function as supports for attention, memory, and intention. They help the practitioner focus, pace themselves, and act with care. This chapter outlines how tools are understood within this tradition and how to relate to them ethically. Tools are supports, not authorities. No tool replaces judgment, consent, or responsibility. A tool becomes useful when it helps the practitioner slow down, creates a clear beginning and ending to a practice, supports self-regulation rather than urgency, reinforces ethical boundaries. Tools do not grant permission to act. They assist reflection and follow-through. Simplicity is not inferior. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not rank tools by complexity or cost. A candle from a grocery store, a cup of water, a piece of paper, or a found object can be as effective as any specialized item. What matters is how intentionally the tool is used and whether it supports clarity rather than distraction. Accumulation is not a spiritual requirement. Owning fewer tools often strengthens discernment. Personal relationship with tools. Tools are relational. They carry meaning through use, not symbolism alone. A tool may feel grounding at one point in a person's life and irrelevant at another. This change is not failure. It reflects growth and shifting needs. Practitioners are encouraged to notice how their bodies respond to particular tools. Comfort, resistance, or overwhelm are forms of information. Shared and public tools. When tools are used in shared or public settings, additional care is required. This includes obtaining consent before involving others, avoiding tools that may be triggering or unsafe, being transparent about what a tool is and is not being used for. No one should be pressured to engage with a tool they do not want to touch, see, or be near. Storage, safety, and discretion. Tools should be stored in ways that prioritize safety, privacy, and practicality. Some practitioners cannot safely store spiritual tools openly. Others may share living space with people who do not consent to their presence. In these cases, discretion is an ethical choice, not a lack of devotion. Digital tools, temporary setups, or symbolic substitutes are all valid options. When a tool stops serving, tools do not need to be kept indefinitely. If a tool no longer supports clarity, care, or ethical action, it may be set aside, repurposed, or released. There is no obligation to maintain a relationship with an object out of guilt or superstition. Letting go can be a form of respect. The tool is not the work, tools are not the work, they assist the work. Attention, consent, accountability, and care are the core of this tradition. Tools help hold those qualities in place, but they do not replace them. The chapters that follow will introduce specific materials and practices. The orientation established here remains active throughout. The tool serves the practice. The practice serves life. Chapter 14, Herbs, Roots, Resins, and Substitutions. This tradition works with plant matter carefully. Herbs, roots, and resins are often spoken about as if they carry automatic power. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, they are understood instead as material supports. They hold cultural memory, sensory association, and symbolic meaning. Their use requires attention, care, and respect for the body. This chapter outlines how botanicals are approached within this tradition, and just as importantly, how they are not used. A clear boundary on internal use. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not teach internal consumption of herbs, roots, resins, or plant preparations. This includes teas, tinctures, smoke inhalation, blends, occult-oriented food dishes, other than praying/chanting over regular food, oils applied to the mouth or nose, any preparation intended to be ingested by humans or animals. Even botanicals that are widely regarded as safe for culinary use are not used internally within this practice. This boundary exists to reduce risk, avoid medical misinformation, and respect the uneven access people have to accurate health guidance. Why food-grade botanicals are still referenced. Botanicals discussed in this book are limited to those commonly recognized as safe for human consumption in non-ritual contexts. This choice establishes a conservative safety baseline. However, referencing food-grade plants does not imply instruction to ingest them. A cinnamon stick on an altar functions symbolically and aromatically. It is not a directive to eat cinnamon for spiritual effect. A bay leaf used for writing is not a recommendation for internal use. Symbol and ingestion are not interchangeable. Primary ways botanicals are used. In this tradition, herbs, roots, and resins may be used in external, non-ingestive ways, such as visual presence scent in ambient space without smoke inhalation practices symbolic placement writing surfaces temporary arrangements containment within sealed objects. These uses are about orientation and meaning, not chemical action. If a practice would require internal use to work, it falls outside the scope of this book. Cultural context and care. Many botanicals carry histories tied to specific cultures, regions, and survival practices. Referencing them does not confer entitlement. Pink Poodle Hoodoo emphasizes ethical adaptation rather than replication, respect for origin without extraction, acknowledgement without ownership. Readers are encouraged to learn where materials come from, how they are traditionally used, and whether their own use aligns with respect rather than convenience. Substitution is expected, no ingredient is mandatory. If a plant is unavailable, unsafe in a particular living situation, culturally inappropriate, or emotionally uncomfortable, it should be substituted or omitted. Common substitutions include written names instead of physical plants, colors instead of materials, digital representations, symbolic objects already present in the home. Choosing not to use a botanical at all is a valid option. Pets, children, and shared space. Many households include animals, children, or people who did not consent to ritual materials. This tradition prioritizes sealed containers, temporary setups, high surfaces, out of reach, non-toxic materials, immediate cleanup. If a practice cannot be done safely in a shared space, it should be adapted or skipped. Less is often better. Using more ingredients does not strengthen a practice. A single thoughtfully chosen item can be more effective than a complex arrangement. Accumulation can distract from intention and increase risk. Simplicity supports clarity. The plant is not the power. Plants do not work on their own. They do not compel outcomes, override consent, or replace responsibility. Their role is supportive. Meaning arises from attention, context, and care. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not attribute automatic efficacy to materials. The work remains relational and ethical, not chemical or consumptive. Proceeding forward, the chapters that follow will discuss specific materials and preparations in greater detail, always within the same boundaries outlined here. No internal use. No pressure to acquire. No harm as proof of devotion. The practice adapts to the practitioner, not the other way around. Chapter 15, Candle Magic. Candle magic is not about fire as force. It is about light, time, and attention. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, candles are used as markers of intention, not as engines of power. A flame does not compel outcomes or carry authority on its own. It offers a visible way to notice duration, pacing, and presence. This chapter explains how candle work functions within this tradition and how it is practiced safely and ethically. What candle magic is. Candle magic is a form of focused attention held over time. Lighting a candle creates a clear beginning, a visible center of focus, a natural ending. The flame becomes a reference point. It does not send anything outward. It does not force change. It supports the practitioner in staying with a thought, prayer, boundary, or intention long enough to notice what shifts internally. The candle is not doing the work. The person tending it is. What candle magic is not. Candle work is not a shortcut to results, a test of faith or devotion, a measure of spiritual strength, a substitute for action, conversation, or care. A candle does not guarantee outcomes. If a practice depends on fire to function, it falls outside the scope of this tradition. Fire safety is not optional. Fire is useful, but it is not symbolic only. It is physical and potentially dangerous. Pink Poodle Hoodoo treats fire safety as an ethical requirement, not a personal preference. Candle work should always include a stable, heat-safe surface, distance from curtains, papers, hair, clothing, and any other highly flammable objects, supervision for the entire time the flame is lit, immediately extinguishing if attention is lost or safety-relevant conditions change into heightened risk. Candles should never be left burning unattended. If lighting a candle cannot be done safely in a particular environment, it should not be done. Using a candle image, lead candle, or symbolic substitute is fully acceptable. Safety is not a lack of devotion. Types of candles. This tradition does not rank candles by size, color, cost, or origin. Any candle that can be used safely may be appropriate, including plain household candles, small birthday candles, tea lights in heat-safe holders. LED or digital representations. Color may carry symbolic meaning for some practitioners, but it is optional. No color is required for a practice to be valid. The best candle is often the most simple and accessible. Making and preparing candles. Candle magic does not require making candles from scratch. Many practitioners never do. Some people choose to make or prepare candles as part of their practice because the process itself can support focus and intention. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, candle making is treated as a craft choice, not a spiritual requirement. A candle that is bought, gifted, found, or already present in the home is fully valid. Basic candle making. At its most basic, candle making involves wax base, S, wick, S, candle making safe fragrance and / or essential oil, S, heat safe container, S, and / or mold, S. This book does not provide detailed wax melting temperatures, pouring instructions, or technical formulas. Readers who wish to learn candle crafting are encouraged to consult dedicated candle making resources and safety guides. Knowing how to make a candle is never more important than using one safely. Wax choices. Waxes commonly used include but are not limited to soy wax, beeswax, paraffin. No wax is spiritually superior. Selection is based on availability, safety, and personal preference. Wax should always be handled carefully, melted using appropriate equipment, and never overheated. Candle making should be done away from children, pets, and distractions. If making candles feels unsafe or impractical, it should not be done. Wicks and containers. Wicks should be appropriate for the size and type of candle being made. Improvised wick substitutes are not appropriate. Containers must be heat safe, stable, and free of cracks or damage. Decorative containers that cannot withstand flame should be avoided. Safety takes precedence over appearance. Fixing and dressing ritual candles. In many folk traditions, including Hoodoo, candles are sometimes fixed or dressed as part of ritual preparation. This is not decoration. It is a symbolic act meant to orient attention, prayer, and intention. Within Pink Poodle Hoodoo, candle fixing is approached with care, restraint, and safety-forward adaptation. Fixing a candle does not require placing physical materials into the wax. Meaning is not increased by adding substances that introduce risk. Symbolic action and ethical clarity matter more than physical complexity. Safety-oriented boundaries. This tradition does not require placing herbs, powders, papers, flowers, glitter, or other loose materials directly into candles. Materials placed inside candles can interfere with the wick, cause flare UPS, or increase fire risk. For this reason, Pink Poodle Hoodoo emphasizes symbolic fixing rather than combustible inclusion. Symbolic alternatives to physical inclusion. When a tradition would historically place materials into or onto a candle, this practice adapts by using safer symbolic methods, such as placing written names or intentions beneath the candle holder, arranging symbolic items nearby rather than inside the candle, using color, placement, or timing to carry meaning, naming associations aloud or silently. These methods preserve ritual intent without increasing physical risk. Respect without replication. This approach is not a rejection of Hoodoo traditions. It is an ethical adaptation shaped by modern living conditions, shared spaces, and safety realities. Pink Poodle Hoodoo does not claim to replicate lineage-based candle work. It honors the logic and purpose of those practices while choosing methods appropriate to contemporary contexts. Timing and duration. Candle work emphasizes pacing, not endurance. A candle does not need to burn for a specific length of time to be effective. Short, intentional periods of focus are often more sustainable than long sessions that strain attention or safety. Extinguishing a candle intentionally is not failure. Blowing out a candle does not undo a practice. The work continues through reflection and follow-through, not through flame duration. Shared space and consent. candle work should never be imposed on others. In shared living spaces, practitioners are responsible for obtaining consent where appropriate, choosing times and locations that do not create risk or discomfort, prioritizing the safety of children, animals, and housemates. Privacy and discretion are ethical choices, not secrecy. When not to use candle magic. Candle work is not appropriate when emotions are escalated and attention is unstable, when fire safety cannot be guaranteed, when a person feels compelled rather than grounded, when immediate action or support is required. Instead, choosing not to light a candle can be the most responsible option. Closing and integration. Candle work ends when the candle is extinguished, but integration continues. Practitioners are encouraged to notice thoughts or emotions that arose, reflect without rushing to interpretation, take practical steps aligned with the intention, and rest when needed. A candle marks attention. It does not replace responsibility. The flame is not the authority, fire does not judge. The candle does not decide. Candle magic in Pink Poodle Hoodoo exists to support clarity, boundaries, and care. When used thoughtfully, it can help hold attention steady. When used carelessly, it introduces unnecessary risk. The flame serves the practice. The practice serves life. Chapter 16, Condition Oils and Spiritual Oils. This chapter introduces condition oils used within Pink Poodle Hoodoo as symbolic, ethically bounded ritual tools. These oils are designed for external, indirect ritual engagement only. They are not cosmetic, medicinal, or consumable products. All oils described in this chapter are for external, indirect ritual use only. No ingestion by humans or animals. No skin contact. No smoke inhalation. No cosmetic or medicinal use. Acceptable methods of engagement include opening the bottle and gently smelling the oil from the container while keeping the face at a safe distance. Placing a small number of drops into a dedicated ritual pot of boiling water on an electric stove only. Anointing candles, jars, petitions, or ritual objects, never bodies. All preparation, storage, and diffusion tools must remain separate from anything used for food preparation. These boundaries are not disclaimers. They are part of the practice. Proprietary Pink Poodle Hoodoo oil formulas. The following oils are all-purpose formulations used across this tradition. They are intentionally streamlined to reduce cost, preparation time, and material barriers while maintaining the same ethical and safety standards. All formulas use a neutral carrier oil, such as olive or grapeseed oil. Dried botanicals commonly recognized as food-grade in non-ritual contexts. External, indirect use only. No formula requires skin contact. Consent respecting general blessings oil, purpose, grounding, openness, everyday blessing. Key botanical ingredients in this formulation: calendula, gentle warmth, continuity, lemon balm, ease, clarity, chamomile, calm presence. This oil is used to support steadiness, receptivity, and alignment with daily intention. Consent respecting love oil, purpose, attraction that honors autonomy and mutual choice. Key botanical ingredients in this formulation: rose, connection without possession, damiana, mutual interest, vitality, lavender, emotional clarity. This oil is not used to influence specific individuals. It is used to clarify desire, boundaries, and readiness for reciprocal connection. Consent respecting prosperity and abundance oil, purpose, opportunity, sustainability, ethical gain. Key botanical ingredients in this formulation: alfalfa, steady growth, mint, circulation, movement, ginger, initiative. This oil supports practical effort and openness to opportunity without bypassing responsibility or labor. Non-vindictive/non-militant return to sender/protection oil, purpose, breaking hexes, returning projected harm, transmuting energy through compassion and firm boundaries. Key botanical ingredients in this formulation: hyssop, clearing, integrity, basil, ethical grounding, bay leaf, boundary setting. This oil is not used for revenge. It is used to return harmful projections to their source without amplification and to reinforce protection against current or future spiritual intrusion. Access and availability. The formulas presented here are adapted versions of the full pink Poodle Hoodoo oils. The author prepares and sells expanded versions made with additional botanicals that follow the same safety guidelines outlined in this chapter. These oils are not available by mail order and may only be sold in person from the city or state where the author is living or working at the time. Because liquid oils cannot be shipped, mail orders may be fulfilled instead with containers of dried herbal blends, clearly labeled with the complete list of botanicals used in the corresponding oils. These blends allow readers to engage the formulas symbolically and practically without requiring the purchase or shipment of liquids. This approach reflects a balance between accessibility and sustainability, offering public access without diminishing the labor, care, or integrity of the work. Closing and transition forward. Condition oils are one way Pink Poodle Hoodoo engages scent without direct bodily contact. They emphasize intention, symbolism, and containment rather than immersion. Other forms of scent work, particularly incense and smoke, require different considerations. These practices involve heat, combustion, air quality, and cultural lineage in ways that demand additional care. For this reason, the next chapter does not offer incense recipes or instructions for creating smoke blends. Instead, it focuses on how to ethically, safely, and respectfully engage incense practices through informed purchasing, proper use, and fire-aware ritual habits. Chapter 17 turns toward sourcing incense from Black/African/African American, Afro-Latine, Jewish/Israeli, Afro-Caribbean, Latin American, and indigenous-owned spiritual supply shops, both online and in person, understanding cultural context without appropriation, and practicing scent work with clear attention to fire safety, ventilation, and household boundaries. This progression reflects the same principle that guides all Pink Poodle Hoodoo work: care comes before intensity, and responsibility comes before performance. Chapter 17, Incense, Smoke, and Scent Work. Smoke as material and situational practice. Smoke does not merely symbolize intention. It moves through shared space, affects air circulation, and interacts with people, animals, and objects present. For this reason, smoke work is treated as a material and situational practice, not decorative atmosphere. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, smoke is approached with restraint, intention, and situational awareness. More smoke does not automatically create stronger work. Subtlety, clarity, and discernment are valued over intensity. Smoke clarifies. It does not command. Ethical sourcing and cultural respect. Incense used in Hoodoo, Brujeria, Santeria, Vodou, Pombagira, New Orleans Voodoo, Vodun, 21 divisions, and other Afro-Latine diasporic traditions is not interchangeable with mass-produced novelty incense. These materials are often prepared, blessed, or crafted within specific cultural lineages and spiritual economies. Supporting Black and Latine-owned spiritual supply shops is not charity. It is participation in the survival and continuity of authentic living traditions and their original communities and descendants. This tradition explicitly rejects anti-Afro-Caribbean bias, the erasure of Black and Afro-Latine spiritual authority, the false framing of Afro-diasporic traditions as exotic, primitive, or universally interchangeable. It also rejects narratives that collapse Jewish identity into whiteness or deny the existence of Jews of color. This includes the erasure of Afro-Jewish communities and the denial of the long-standing history Jewish participation in Afro-diasporic spiritual exchange and activism solidarity. Choosing incense with discernment. When selecting incense, clarity matters more than abundance. Practitioners are encouraged to read labels carefully and to ask questions when information is not provided. Look for incense that clearly lists ingredients or materials, is sold with cultural context rather than vague mysticism, avoids exaggerated claims of power, domination, or guaranteed outcomes. Avoid incense marketed as forcing outcomes without consent, controlling others' free/true will, instant, automatic, same day, unstoppable/unbreakable, or overnight solutions to complex situations. Discernment is part of the practice. Fire safety as spiritual practice. Fire safety is not separate from spiritual ethics. It is an expression of care. When engaging incense, keep burning materials away from flammable objects. Use stable, heat-safe holders. Maintain adequate ventilation. Never leave burning incense unattended. Avoid use around children, animals, or people with respiratory sensitivities. Smoke work should never compromise physical safety, housing security, or well-being. If incense cannot be used safely in a given space, it is appropriate to abstain. No practice is spiritually strengthened by endangering health, housing, or safety. Alternatives and accessibility. Not all practitioners can safely burn incense. Some live in shared housing, smoke-free buildings, or environments where fire or smoke would create danger or conflict. This tradition affirms that, not burning incense does not diminish spiritual legitimacy. Intention, attention, and ethical alignment are not dependent on smoke. Scent work may be engaged through non-burning methods where appropriate, or omitted entirely without loss of integrity. Transition forward. Incense works on the level of shared space and presence. The next chapter turns toward practices that engage bodies, surfaces, and lived environments more directly through cleansing and care, while maintaining the same commitment to safety, consent, and accessibility. 18 Baths, soaps and floor washes. Baths, soaps, and floor washes are often misunderstood or flattened into aesthetics, trends, or therapeutic claims. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, these practices are approached as material actions with symbolic intent, not as medical treatments, cosmetic enhancements, or moral cleansing rituals. This work is not about purity or erasure. It is about resetting conditions, tending to space, and clarifying what is carried forward and what is released. Material reality, safety, and consent. Any practice involving water, surfaces, or contact with the body must remain grounded in material reality. This tradition explicitly rejects claims that spiritual baths cure illness or replace medical care. The use of soaps or washes as substitutes for mental health support. And framing cleansing as a moral obligation or measure of worth. Consent applies in multiple directions: consent of the practitioner, consent of others who share the space, and consent of the body and its limits. If a practice compromises physical safety, housing security, skin health, or accessibility, it is not required. Abstention is a valid and respected choice. Baths as situational reset. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, baths function as situational resets, not transformations of identity. They may be used after prolonged stress or conflict, at the close of a difficult chapter, before work that requires steadiness or clarity. They are not used to erase emotions, suppress grief, anger, or fear, nor force readiness or forgiveness. Water does not command change. It marks transition. Full immersion is not required. Brief contact, partial washing, or symbolic engagement may be sufficient. Melt and pour soaps as symbolic contact work. Pink Poodle Hoodoo permits the use of lye-free, melt and pour soap bases as a symbolic extension of condition work, provided all materials are commercially skin-safe and sourced from reputable craft suppliers. These soaps are not medicinal, therapeutic, or spiritually absorbed through the skin. Their value lies in ritual framing, repetition, and intention, not chemical action. Acceptable materials include pre-made, lye-free melt and pour soap bases, and skin-safe synthetic fragrance oils labeled and sold specifically for soap making. Synthetic fragrance use is guided by symbolic scent profiles, a pan-occult standard practice in which scent is selected to align with the intended condition or working. These profiles inform selection and proportion but do not constitute separate materials and are not limited to the 4 conditions discussed in this book. Symbolic scent profile selection applies to any ritual tools made with synthetic fragrance oils and is not limited to soaps, washes, or any single category of work. Synthetic fragrance oils must be sourced exclusively from soap-making sections of arts and crafts stores or suppliers that clearly designate them as skin-safe. Candle-making synthetic fragrance oils are not interchangeable with soap-making oils, even when scent names appear similar. Before any soap is used on more than a small area of skin, a patch test is required. Apply the finished soap to a small, clearly non-sensitive area of skin and wait a minimum of 24 hours. If irritation, redness, or discomfort occurs, the soap is not to be used on the body. Soap remains a functional material. In this tradition, meaning comes from intention, context, safety, and care. Botanical infusions for baths and floor washes. The same 4 botanical blends used in my proprietary Pink Poodle Hoodoo condition oils may be adapted for water-based work through contained infusion, not free-floating materials. This is done by placing dried herbs into a secured cloth sachet or tea bag, steeping the sachet in hot water, and removing the cloth sachet and the herbs within it from the contained water, bathtub, mop bucket, etc., before the tactical use/application of the botanically infused water. This method applies to spiritual baths, foot soaks, floor wash, mop water. No salt, sugar, powders, exfoliants, or granular substances are added. The work is infusion-based, not abrasion-based. Use with proportion and care. More time, more material, or stronger scent does not automatically create stronger work. These practices are designed to be brief, proportionate, and situational. Clarity is prioritized over intensity. Respectful handling of ritual remnants. All ritual material remnants must be handled respectfully once their initial use is complete. This requirement applies to all forms of ritual material remnants, including but not limited to water, herbs, oils, wax, soap, incense ash, infused cloths, and any tools or substances altered through ritual preparation. Respectful handling does not always require disposal. In some cases, remnants may be intentionally retained, transformed, or rehoused in forms such as sachets, dream pillows, wall hangings, bottles, jars, or other contained vessels, provided they are kept with care, intention, appropriate boundaries, and safety. Whether released, retained, or transformed, ritual remnants are never treated as waste. They remain part of the work and must be handled with intention, context, safety, and care. Accessibility and alternatives. Not all practitioners can safely engage in water-based practices. This tradition affirms that visualization, prayer, or written intention are valid alternatives. Mobility, disability, housing restrictions, or trauma history are not obstacles to spiritual legitimacy. Care for the body includes knowing when not to engage. Participation may occur through preparation without use, symbolic handling, or intention alone. If materials are prepared, respectful handling requirements still apply. Transition forward. Baths, soaps, and floor washes address contact and surfaces. The next chapter turns toward portable works, exploring how intention, protection, and memory move with the practitioner beyond the home and into daily life. Chapter 19. Mojo and Gris Gris, Purpose and Scope. Mojo bags and Gris Gris are forms of portable condition work within Pink Poodle Hoodoo. They are designed to accompany a practitioner through daily life, supporting continuity of intention over time. This chapter addresses their ethical framing, material limits, construction principles, and appropriate alternatives. This chapter does not present Mojo or Gris Gris as mandatory practices. They are optional tools, used only when proportionate, safe, and contextually appropriate. What Mojo and Gris Gris are. Mojo and Gris Gris are small, contained workings intended to travel with the practitioner, accompany daily activity, function as quiet reminders rather than active interventions because they move with the body. Portable condition workings require stricter safety, material, and ethical boundaries than stationary workings. Portability does not imply intensity. Carrying does not imply constant engagement. Stillness, rest, and discretion are part of the practice. Construction as deliberate assembly. Mojo bag and Gris Gris ingredients are not accumulated instinctively or impulsively. Their construction is deliberate and minimal. Each ingredient should be intentional, symbolically legible, limited in number, proportionate to the condition being addressed. More materials do not necessarily strengthen the working. Clarity does. Safety, boundaries, and material limits. All portable condition workings must remain grounded in physical reality. Acceptable materials should be dry, stable, resistant to mold, rot, leakage, or staining. Unacceptable materials include fresh plant matter, bodily fluids, substances requiring ingestion, items that stain, puncture, or abrade skin, materials that degrade through heat, moisture, or friction. No carried working should compromise physical safety, housing stability, employment, or physical and/or mental health and well-being. Accessibility, lineage, and alternatives. Not all practitioners can safely or comfortably carry physical items. Historically, mojo bags and gris arise from African diasporic spiritual lineages, including Central and West African cosmologies carried forward through enslavement, survival, and adaptation in the Americas. These practices developed within conditions of displacement, surveillance, and material restriction, shaping traditions that emphasize portability, discretion, and symbolic clarity rather than excess. Pink Poodle Hoodoo acknowledges this lineage and treats adaptation and accessibility as continuations of that historical reality, not departures from it. Pink Poodle Hoodoo affirms that visualization is valid. Written intention is valid. If physical carrying is not accessible or appropriate, the practitioner may maintain the working through intentional visualization or focused mental rehearsal, without loss of legitimacy. Transition forward. Mojo bags and gris work are portable forms of prayer and condition setting, carried into daily life rather than fixed in one place. The next section turns toward practical spell work shaped by specific needs. These workings are brief, focused, and adaptable, intended to be applied through the practitioner's own tools, customs, and level of experience. The emphasis remains on clarity, proportion, and care. Not every situation requires immediate action, and choosing when to work is as important as choosing how. Part V, Spell Work by Need, Chapter 20, Love and Harmony. This chapter addresses love as a condition of alignment rather than pursuit. The work here concerns mutuality, clarity, and emotional steadiness. These incantations are not designed to compel affection, secure attachment, or bind another's will. They are spoken to orient the practitioner toward relationships that are reciprocal, honest, and sustainable. The language throughout this chapter avoids urgency, exclusivity, and domination. Love is approached as something that may be welcomed, tended, or released, but never forced. Spell I for mutual attraction, let what is mutual draw me near. Let truth arrive and stand sincere. What meets me whole may walk my way. What cannot meet me may drift away. Spell 2 for peaceful separation, what pulls my heart and brings me pain, I loose with care and without blame. No bitter word, no binding chain. I bless the end and keep my gain. Spell 3 for emotional balance, I hold my center, soft and clear. No rush, no grasp, no rule of fear. I meet with care, I choose my ground. Love grows where steadiness is found. These spells are anchors for intention. They may be spoken alone or alongside the practitioner's chosen tools or customs. No specific method is required. Chapter 21, Money, Work, and Open Roads, Introduction. This chapter addresses material flow, labor, opportunity, and movement without urgency or coercion. In Pink Poodle Hoodoo, money work is never separated from ethics, sustainability, or personal capacity. Open roads are not forced open, they are recognized, prepared for, and entered with discernment. The spells in this chapter are brief verbal anchors. They are meant to accompany practical effort, honest exchange, and attention to timing. They do not replace skill, rest, planning, or collective conditions. Spell I for steady provision, I meet my needs through steady care. I earn my keep through honest share. What comes to me comes clean and fair. What lasts is built by tending there. Spell 2 for fair work and right exchange, I give my labor, clear and true. I take what fair return is due. No grasping hand, no broken scale. My work may stand, my word prevail. Spell 3-4 open roads, what is not mine will step aside. What fits my path may walk beside. I move with care, I choose my pace. Open roads reveal their place. Spell 4-4 stability without excess, enough is held, enough is found. I keep my feet upon the ground. No rushed demand, no hollow gain. What feeds my life may yet remain. Closing note, these spells are not commands. They are anchors for intention, meant to accompany lived discernment. Not every need requires urgency. Restraint remains a form of wisdom. Transition forward, once movement and provision are addressed, the work must turn toward protection. Open roads invite contact, visibility, and exchange, not all of which arrive clean. The next chapter addresses how to hold boundaries, clear interference, and return what does not belong without escalation or harm. Attention Monday, March 9, 2026, due to my recent divorce and also my mostly unrelated recent rebranding process, I am releasing this unfinished rough draft with a simple note, to be updated, continued, and concluded at a later, undetermined time and place. Please remember that first and foremost, Pink Poodle Hoodoo is a spiritual theology, not just a collection of spells, potions and rituals. Enjoy this rough draft and as for the final draft, stay tuned. Love always, ULC Reverend AM Mocha Majesty Midnight Skahuk Web aka Prophetess Akanji Kamani Lolo Vivi.